Oh my word, look at my hair. You know what they say? You can take the girl out of the 80s, you just can't take the 80s out of the girl. There's not much I can do about it, I'm afraid. I am a refugee from the 80s, so we're just going to all have to deal with it. Hello, happy new week, everybody. I hope you are having a super Monday so far. Hello to everybody in chat. Thank you for joining me. Welcome back to my channel. If it's your first time visiting, well, hello there. Thank you so much for stopping by. I really appreciate you spending your valuable time at my tiny little channel. It really gets me every time. How was your weekend? I hope it was filled with lots of love and lots of laughter. And if it wasn't, I am so sorry. I hope your week improves. So let's hang out and spend some quality time together. In case you're wondering why I have an L plate hanging in the background, I'm a learner streamer and I'm not going to take it off until I reach 500 subs. So I don't make the rules. How is everyone this morning? Good morning, Stickman. Hi, Carl. Joys of being the boss, huh? Good morning, Lambo. Hello, Keely. You are really a good egg looking after all those critters. I'm glad they have someone like you to look after them. This week, I have something interesting organised for you. G'day, Ed B. I have something interesting organised for you every morning for our little smoko break, and something very special on Wednesday when I will be joined by retired Australian Army Major Stuart McCarthy, amazing, highly accomplished man and someone who I am very blessed to call my friend. He does an awful lot to advocate for veterans and folks with disabilities. Stuart will be joining me on Wednesday live to answer some of my questions about the Royal Commission into veteran suicide, because it's really confusing to navigate. So if you care about Aussie veterans or are just as confused as I am about how the government is going about this Royal Commission, make sure you come by at the special time of 10:30 a.m. on Wednesday, when my friend Stuart McCarthy will be joining us live for a chinwag. G'day, Stoddy. It's nice to see Alpha Lauren. Yeah. Hi, Pirates of Shangaloo. Hello, Night Watchers. In the meantime, I thought we might have a gander at some strange Australian maritime mysteries, from ghost ships to out-of-place artefacts. Let's dive in, excuse the pun, and we can see what we can see. Was that really bad? I'm so punny. Number one, the mystery of the Kaz 2. Not our Kaz. This Kaz starts with a K. In April 2007, a 12-metre sailing catamaran known as the Kaz 2 was found drifting 80 nautical miles off the East Australian coastline with no sign of its West Australian crew of 3. On board, the engine was running, the table was set for a meal, fishing lines were set, a computer was open and running, fenders were down on one side of the catamaran, and apart from a torn sail, there were no signs of anything amiss on the boat. The crew has never been found, and no explanation has ever really been given for their disappearance. There's many theories have been put forward. The fact that the fenders were down led to suggestions that they'd been boarded by another boat and were victims of foul play. As clothes were found neatly folded on the aft deck, another theory was that the 3 crew known to be on board had all taken a swim together and the craft drifted away. It's assumed that the craft were not able to get back on board and drowned. Other theories were that the catamaran became stuck on a sandbank in the area and that the men jumped overboard to push her free, but a gust of wind just happened to blow the vessel away from them, or that one fell overboard and the others were lost trying to save him. It was determined that by instruments on board the yacht that it had not been steered since the day of her departure, but had not been discovered, although it had been drifting for 3 full days. An air and sea search was called off after 4 days, and the mystery has never been solved. Good morning, Lurker. Yeah, I do. I'm good at dad jokes. Hi, Carl. According to the Australian Maritime Safety Authority, CAS 2 departed from Airlie Beach on the 15th of April 2007 and was heading for Townsville, Queensland on the first leg of a journey that was to take it around Northern Australia to Western Australia, where the men were from. The first indication that there was a problem came on the 18th of April when a helicopter reported spotting CAS 2 adrift in the vicinity of the Great Barrier Reef, and its crew were potentially in distress. On the 20th of April, maritime authorities caught up with the boat and boarded it. They found the three-man crew missing in circumstances which they described as being strange. John Hall from Queensland Emergency Management Office said what they found was a bit strange in that everything was normal. There was just no sign of the crew. In a statement delivered on the day of the boarding, officials with the Queensland Emergency Management Office revealed that the boat was in serviceable condition and was laid out as if the crew was still on board. Food and flatware was set out on the table. A laptop computer was set up, turned on and running. The engine was still running. Officials also confirmed that the boat's emergency systems, including its radio and GPS, were fully functional and that it still had its full complement of life jackets. There was even a small boat still hoisted on the stern of the boat, and the anchor was up. The only signs that were out of the ordinary, other than the disappearance of the three-man crew, was one of the boat's sails had been badly shredded and that there was no life raft on board. However, it couldn't be confirmed that there ever was a lifeboat on board. A kraken got them. You might be right there, Stoddy. CAS 2 was towed into the Townsville port for forensic examination. On the 21st of April, Sergeants Bardell and Malloy of the Queensland Police searched the ship for signs of foul play or third-party involvement. No evidence for this was found. They found the cabin to be neat and tidy, apart from some magazines. Torn pieces of newspaper were on the floor and a wine cask which was laying on the floor. But it was later determined that these items ended up on the floor while the ship was being towed to shore, and when it was first boarded, they were all neatly in their position. In the sink were a few butter knives, and on the bench in the galley, a plastic sheath of fishing knives was found, and they didn't appear to have been used recently. Under Batten's bed, in a sealed container, the investigators found a firearm and some ammunition, none of which was apparently missing. In a drawer, they found an additional single bullet of the same caliber. Excuse me. After analysing data about the CAS 2's course from the ship's GPS system, police say that on the morning of its departure from Airlie Beach, the ship was steered in a northeast direction into an area where squalls and rough seas were building. On that same day, late in the afternoon, the GPS data showed it to be adrift. The investigators also recovered a video sorry, I'm choking on my tea, that showed footage taken by the crew during their trip, which revealed some clues as to the men's last day. The last footage filmed, I'm sure I'm getting a cold, by James Turnbridge at 10:05 a.m, the day that the men had disappeared. Let me have a drink. Batten was at the helm. Everybody else was sitting around. The boat panned around and showed where they were. The engine isn't running. The fenders can be seen in their place, hanging from the safety rails on both sides of the boat. So the fenders weren't down at this point. And it showed islands and surrounds and quite peaceful seas. It's a bit choppy, nothing serious. None of the men were wearing life jackets. Turnsted's shirt and glasses were not in the place where they were later found, even though this video was taken on the same day that they must have left the vessel. Search and rescue efforts began on Wednesday, the 18th of April, and Australian Search and Rescue sent a Navy aircraft to search in the vicinity of the vessel in an effort to locate the missing men. At the same time, Bowen Voluntary Marine Rescue launched a coastal and island search. At night, an aircraft with infrared capability was used to search the reefs. The next day, a full-scale search and rescue effort was launched, involving volunteer rescue units from several towns, as well as the Townsville Coast Guard, 2 rescue helicopters, 9 aeroplanes, and 2 commercial vessels. Data from the CAS-2's GPS system was also retrieved and analysed in order to help narrow the search. Dr. Paul Lucken, a survival time expert, was consulted. He concluded that it was unlikely that the men were still alive, and if they were still in the water, as they had probably gone overboard 3 to 4 days earlier. The team still had hope that the men could have reached some bit of land and continued searching. Another coastline search was launched on Monday, the 23rd of April, after some new information had come in. But again, the search proved fruitless and was called off on the 25th of April. On the 4th of August 2008, an inquest into the men's disappearance began in the Townsville Coroner's Court. The inquest was led by Queensland State Coroner Michael Barnes and focused on whether the men were dead, the circumstances surrounding their disappearance, and if the search had been adequate for the missing men. In total, 27 witnesses were called to testify. Some of them had seen the ship on its fateful voyage and helped authorities reconstruct the chain of events. In one of the hearings, Jennifer Batten testified that her husband Derek was an experienced and careful yachtsman. He'd been around boats for over 25 years and that he was acutely aware of the need for safety. He'd earned his recreational skipper's ticket and qualification in marine radio. Ed, you didn't probably know about that. Every summer they travelled together to Rottnest Island on various motorboats, although CAS-2 was their first sailboat. After they bought it, the couple took a 6-week sailing course around the Whitsundays twice. Beautiful. Apart from a minor problem with the propeller, the trips went without problem. There was no incident. Batten's wife also stated that the original plan was to sail CAS-2 to Fremantle as a couple, but that Batten was worried that just 2 people aboard might not be safe. He decided to take his neighbours, brothers Peter and James Turnstead, with him instead. The trip was planned over several months, and it seems like they planned it really, really well. They took a lot of care. It was discussed daily. They plotted routes. They used a computer to do that. They allowed themselves 6 to 8 weeks to get back to Fremantle. But because they were retired, it didn't really matter how long they took. They could take their time getting back to WA. They didn't want to sail at night for safety reasons, and Jennifer Batten said that they had planned to stay reasonably close to the shore for the entire trip. Although Batten was taking medications for high cholesterol, mild diabetes, and had suffered a heart attack at the age of 50, he was well enough and fit for the journey. Sergeant Paul Malloy, one of the 3 forensic police officers who examined CAS-2 after she was towed back to shore in April 2007, told the inquest that he did not believe that the men had met with foul play. He spent several hours combing the ship for signs of a struggle, but found no evidence that anyone beside the 3-man crew of the vessel had even been aboard. We came to the conclusion that the boat itself was not a crime scene, he told the inquest. After questions by Peter Turnstead's widow, Frances, as to why the police did not check for fingerprints, Sergeant Malloy said his years of experience told him that it was not necessary. Might have been interesting, though. State Coroner Barnes admits in his official report that he, and this is a quote, cannot be so definitive about the circumstances under which the deaths occurred. However, Based on the eyewitness accounts, the video found on board, the state of the yacht in which it was found, the report proposed the following scenario: that on Sunday, the 15th of April, 2007, at 10:05 a.m., that's pretty precise, the CAS 2 was sailing in the vicinity of George Point. Up to that moment, everything was going as planned, as we could tell by the video. But in the following hour, something happened that changed their situation dramatically. The men hauled in a white rope that had been seen in the video trailing behind the boat, and they bundled it up on the foredeck, possibly to dry, next to the locker that it was normally kept in. For unknown reasons, James Turnstead then took off his t-shirt and glasses and placed them on the back seat. The report says that since the men's fishing lure was found entangled in the ship's port side rudder, an obvious explanation would be that one of them tried to free the lure and fell overboard while doing so. Standing on the boat's sugar scoop platform, which is apparently a platform at the back of the ship close to the waterline. I don't know a lot about sailing, so excuse me if I get it wrong. They said it's perilous and that falling in the water is actually quite easy, but getting back aboard is almost impossible. One of the other men then came to the rescue of his brother, they suggest, while Batten, still on board, started the motor and realised he had to drop the sails before he could go back for his friends. As he left the helm to drop the sails, a deviation of the ship's course or wind direction could have easily caused a jibe, which is a swinging of the boom across the deck that knocked Batten overboard. That's kind of like a lot of strange circumstances. Apparently, this could have happened even before Batten was unable to untie and throw out the life ring to his friends. There was a blue mug found near the life ring, which might support that. Since the boat was travelling before wind and at a speed of 15 knots, it would be out of reach of the men within seconds. The report states from that point the end would have been swift. Apparently, none of the men were strong swimmers. Why are you in a boat? Apparently, the men may have become quickly exhausted and sunk beneath the waves. The report does rule out foul play and a staged disappearance. As the interior of the CAS 2 showed the laundry hung up to dry, several alternative explanations have been put forward to the crew's disappearance. According to authorities in Townsville, the weather had been windy and the sea had been rough between the time that CAS 2 departed and was found drifting. This led authorities to speculate that the crew may have experienced some form of sudden difficulty during rough weather and gone overboard. However, one issue with this theory is that the contents of the cabin, like the table and the stuff on it, did not seem to have been disrupted in any way, though it was all still in place. It was only disrupted when it was towed to Townsville. Relatives of the missing men say that the boat's condition make this unlikely and point to discrepancies such as the fact that the men's fishing lines and laundry were set out and that their life jackets were still stowed, which indicated that they were not experiencing rough weather at the time of their disappearance. Also noted was the fact that the CAS 2 was found with its fenders out, and remember in the video they hadn't been. And that led to speculation that the boat may have docked with another as yet unknown vessel to which the crew might have willingly or unwillingly transferred. The fenders were out on their yacht, and the only reason you ever put them out is when another boat comes aside or if you come to rest against a wharf. That was said by Hope Hemming, who was the niece of the boat owner Derek Batten. In answer to speculation, Townsville police stated that small craft commonly leave their fenders out at all times, making it impossible to draw any definitive conclusions about this feature. The trio were described as typical Aussie blokes, and we may never know exactly what happened to those aboard the CAS 2. What do you think of that one? That's a creepy story, I think. Sharks ate their faces. Good grief. All right, number 2 is possibly even creepier because, number 1, we can explain it a little bit. Number 2 is the Patenella, the Australian ghost ship, one of the South Pacific's greatest sea mysteries of another kind was the disappearance of the Patenella, a 19-metre steel schooner which vanished without a trace while approaching Sydney Harbour in November 1988 in calm seas. Patenella was one of the sturdiest yachts afloat and was famous for her Antarctic voyages and circumnavigations of the globe. She was considered by those who sailed her and by the man who built her to be virtually unsinkable. They're famous last words. We've heard that before, haven't we? Constructed of steel with 4 watertight bulkheads, Patenella carried the latest safety and navigational equipment. During her 3 decades sailing the roughest seas in the world, the Patenella did not falter. Yet she disappeared on a calm November night within sight of the lights of Botany Bay. There was no mayday call, no distress flares sighted, no debris, and no bodies as evidence of her sinking. That's funny, Stephen Webb. I actually got that one. However, just under 20 years later, a ghostly message in a bottle was found from one of the crew on a beach in the Great Australian Bight by a beachcomber. The solitary trace was a barnacle-encrusted lifebuoy that was found floating off Terrigal 7 months after she disappeared, but no explanation has ever been given as to why she disappeared on such a calm night so close to home and civilization. The Patenella's voyage into oblivion began on the other side of the country on the 16th of October 1988. The elegant steel-hulled Patenella set out from Fremantle's harbour for Airlie Beach in Queensland. On board were the schooner's owner, wealthy businessman Alan Nichol, his skipper, the commercial pilot and Admiral's Cup sailor Ken Jones, Mrs. Noreen Jones and their daughter Ronna Lee, and 2 young sailors, John Blissett and Michael Calvin. The latter pair had so admired the magnificent boat moored in the harbour that they approached Nichol to ask if they could work aboard her. Nichol hired them as crew for the voyage to the Whitsunday Islands. Now, they were enjoying themselves, and these 2 young crewmen were accumulating a generous block of sailing time that would count toward their navigation certificates. The Patenella was fitted with more than enough safety devices. It had a radar, satellite navigation, watertight components, lifeboats, electronic radio beacon that would signal the Patenella's position for 48 hours if there was an emergency. Now, the first leg of the journey ended at Esperance in WA, where Alan Nichol, the owner, disembarked as he had business commitments back in Perth. Ronna Lee left the yacht at Port Eyre, South Australia, also due to work commitments. Patenella continued eastward, regularly radioing her position along the way. At 12:57 a.m. on the 8th of November, Keith McLennan, a radio operator with the Overseas Telecommunications Commission, the OTC, received their first of what would be 3 radio messages from the Patenella. In a voice which seemed relaxed and calm, Ken Jones gave the schooner's call sign Victor Mike Papa Tango and reported their position was 10 more nautical miles east of Botany Bay. He then said, "I believe we've run out of fuel. We've hoisted our sails and we're tacking out to the east, tacking about 080. Our intention is to tack out for a couple of hours, then tack back in. We may need some assistance in the morning to get back into Sydney Harbour." That night was overcast with a light northeast wind and a moderate swell, which the schooner would have easily been able to ride. McLennan subsequently testified that the Patenella's seemingly routine message set off no alarm bells. It was quite common for vessels to run out of fuel in calm weather like this. There appeared to be nothing to worry about. the schooner would have been within sight of the lights of Botany Bay. Ken Jones made his second call at 1:58 a.m. This time he asked for a weather report, explaining that he didn't want to be caught too far out before sailing into harbour. He then requested directions to the coastal town of Moruya. I hope I said that right. This was puzzling, as Moruya is located on the south coast of New South Wales, which was a few hours sailing time away from where the Patenella had been. McLennan told Jones that there was a strong wind in the area and recalled there again appeared to be no signs of distress in Jones's voice. Just after 2 a.m., not long after, OTC picked up a third call from Jones. The skipper's voice faded and crackled. He could be heard saying, 300 kilometres south, is it? South? His words were drowned out in static. No further messages would be received from the Patenella. When Keith McLennan ended his shift at 3:40 a.m., he mentioned the 3 calls to his relief operator. No one at this stage was concerned. It was not unknown for skippers to radio that they would be entering Sydney Heads, only to change their minds and sail elsewhere without advising the shore radio operators. No one expected that Jones would need to contact the Sydney OTC station again. Alan Nichols, the schooner's owner, believed that Jones had made a late decision to bypass Sydney and travel up the New South Wales coast to Airlie Beach. However, as the days passed, Nichol, along with relatives and friends of the 4 people on board, began to worry. Of particular concern was Jones's son, Peter, who had been unable to contact his father via ship-to-shore radio, which was their habit. By the 18th of November, the day on which the Patenella should have reached Airlie Beach, a full alert was sounded. The families wanted the Federal Sea Safety and Surveillance Unit to mount a major search for the schooner, but it was too late. After 10 days, the Patenella could have been anywhere. At least 100 aircraft would have been needed to scour the 200,000 kilometres of coastline and ocean, and even then the rescuers could not have known exactly where the schooner was. The Patenella could have sailed straight out to sea, headed for another country, assuming that the schooner had not sunk. If the Patenella has sunk off Botany Bay, it would have been impossible to find the wreckage, as the water 10 miles off the coast is 140 metres deep, way too deep for divers or a ship with tracking equipment to find anything. The parents of the 2 young crewmen, Blissett and Calvin, talked to the media, and 2 disturbing facts emerged. On the afternoon of the 5th of November, Michael Calvin called his father, who lived in Taree on the New South Wales mid-north coast. He uttered 2 words, "G'day, Dad," before the line went dead. In a remarkable coincidence, Calvin had been employed as a set rigger on the Australian movie Dead Calm, and the film tells the story of a couple holidaying aboard a yacht in the Whitsunday Islands who are terrorised by a crazed stranger. Some scenes of the movie were shot at Airlie Beach, the destination of the Patenella. Peter Jones believed that something sinister had happened to his parents and that his father was making the radio calls under duress. It's certainly my father's voice on the tape, but it doesn't seem to be his words. I don't think he'd ever say he believed that he'd run out of fuel. He's too experienced to be so vague. I think his radio calls were veiled calls for help. Both Peter Jones and Alan Nichol believed that the Patenella was not short of fuel. The fuel tanks were filled to capacity at the start of the voyage, while additional diesel had been added at stops along the way. A search was done in the area from where Ken Jones said he was calling, but no debris were ever found. Authorities checked all 48 vessels that were in the area in the early hours of the 8th of November and could find no damage on any of them, which suggests that the Patenella did not accidentally collide with another vessel. Even if the schooner did have a collision, the watertight components would have made it very, very difficult for the Patenella to sink if her hull had even been holed. A previous collision in 1958 with a submerged rock off the Tasmanian coast had ripped a 1.5 metre long hole in the hull, but the schooner was still able to travel 200 kilometres to port for repairs. Police were sceptical about those 3 final messages. They speculated that the schooner may have been hundreds of kilometres away from Botany Bay when they were transmitted. That's even weirder. And that the messages were a ruse designed to confuse rescuers while the schooner's hijackers made their escape. I hadn't thought of that. The first solid evidence of the possible fate of the Patenella came on the 9th of May in 1989. A fisherman at Terrigal on the New South Wales Central Coast, just north of Sydney, hauled in a barnacle-encrusted life buoy. Seeing that there were words printed on the buoy, he scraped away some of the barnacles, which revealed Patenella, Fremantle. Despite having some key evidence removed when the fishermen scraped away the barnacles, the buoy was examined by a marine biologist who determined that the buoy could not have been in the ocean for more than 4 weeks. Spooky. Based on this analysis, it seems that the schooner was afloat 6 months after her final radio message. Hundreds of sightings of yachts that looked similar to the Patenella were reported from all over the world: Australia, South America, Southeast Asia. Some of the theories regarding the Patenella's fate included a Russian submarine on a spying mission that collided with the Patenella before fleeing the scene. I don't know where they get that from. That might be a bit of a leap. Maybe arms dealers, smugglers, drug dealers had seized control of the schooner and killed all aboard. Maybe. And then they'd refitted and renamed the vessel and used it for their illegal activities far away from Australia. That is a possibility. You know, maybe the schooner had hit an uncharted reef or half-submerged container, which had fallen off a freighter. It had then sunk, killing all on board. But again, we spoke about how difficult it would be for it to sink because of its design. The inquest at the Glebe Coroner's Court in Sydney lasted for 4 days, as there was insufficient evidence to suggest that the yacht had been hijacked. A finding of accidental sinking was declared by the New South Wales Deputy Coroner Derek Hand. But there is an interesting postscript to the disappearance 20 years later. On New Year's Eve 2007, Cheryl Wademan, husband Gary and brother Doug had driven to a remote beach near Eucla at the Western Australian-South Australian border for a swim. Ms. Wademan was taken aback when she found a Bacardi rum bottle half buried upside down in the sand with a note inside. It was only after returning home to Esperance, which is 9 hours by car, that the trio carefully removed the note. In faded blue pen, the note read, "Hi there, out here in the lonely Southern Ocean, and thought we would give away a free holiday in the Whitsundays Islands in North Queensland, Australia. Our ship is travelling from Fremantle, Western Australia, to Queensland to work as a charter vessel." It was written by John Blissett, one of the crew members of the Patenella, and thrown overboard a week before he, his fellow crew members, and the schooner mysteriously disappeared. The ship vanished without a trace while approaching Sydney Harbour in calm seas, leaving behind only a lifebuoy and a message in a bottle. Apparently, it is shockingly common for ships to vanish without a trace, but the disappearance of the Patenella has enough oddities to make the mystery somewhat unique. To date, it's anyone's guess what happened to the ship and its 4 inhabitants. The yacht's name only adds to the eeriness of the story. The name was apparently chosen by the ship's original owner, Phil Waterworth, who assumed it was an Aboriginal word for a protective god. Then, in 1964, a group of scientists who were chartering the Patenella for an expedition did a little research on the name and concluded that the name actually meant storm spirit. But as it happened, they were all wrong. You see, Patenella is really another word for devil. What's in a name though, huh? G'day, Kaz. Thanks for... Hi, Kynan. My last one on the list is the Stradbroke Island Galleon. This one really gets my imagination going. In 1989, Greg Jeffreys, Australian archaeologist and historian, began searching for the wreck of a supposed Spanish or Portuguese galleon that is apparently off Stradbroke Island in Queensland, Australia. If found, this wreck could rewrite the history books of who discovered Eastern Australia. The mysterious remains of the ship have been reported in 18 Mile Swamp, generally situated near Swan Bay or Jumpinpin. Over time, there have been dozens of reported sightings, but still the mystery remains. Jeffreys, the archaeologist, points to the discovery of a sailor's dirk, a brass walking stick head, a brass button, a sword blade, a fishing weight, and a corroded silver coin dated 1597 on Stradbroke Island as evidence of the existence of a Portuguese or Spanish galleon buried in 18 Mile Swamp. Mr. Jeffreys claims he found the artefacts about 900 metres inland, suggesting that the ship had run aground hundreds of years ago and that the island's sand had built up around it. Rumours of Aboriginals trading with Spanish coins and the subsequent circulation of these coins in the community also adds weight to this theory. Other testimony includes that Aboriginals knew of the shipwreck for centuries, apparently. Frank Boyce, who lived there in the 1920s, was taken to the wreck by Aborigines, apparently after he saved the life of an Aboriginal woman who was drowning. I don't know if that's true. And claims they told him that they'd been taking the gold over the years to pay for things in town. A theory has been put forward that Captain Cook used secret Portuguese and Spanish maps to aid his discovery and navigation of the Pacific and Australia's east coast. So could the Stradbroke Island Galleon prove this theory? Maybe. Are the remains in 18 Mile Swamp a lost Portuguese or Spanish galleon? Is it a Spanish treasure ship or a Manila galleon carrying millions of pesos in silver and gold coin that was shipwrecked on Australia's Queensland coast and it's just sitting there? The Queensland shipwreck is likely to be either Portuguese or Spanish origin, although there is a slight chance that it may be a VOC, which is from the Dutch East India Company. It could be one of those. If it was a Manila galleon or a VOC ship, there may have been some truth to the stories of a vast treasure buried somewhere on Queensland's Stradbroke Island. Matthew Heeb discovered the burnt remains of a ship in 18 Mile Swamp on Stradbroke Island in the vicinity of Swan Bay at Junpinpin in the early 1890s. He described to Isabel Hanna and the Honourable George Appel that it having a high poop and forecastle. Yes, I just said poop. Get it out of your systems. I'll wait for you. The Love Boat. Unfortunately, since Heeb saw the shipwreck in the 1890s, several fires have burnt over it. In 1934, Jim Walker and 2 friends found the remains again after a fire had burnt through the 18 Mile Swamp and during a drought. The fires had reduced the above swamp level visible parts of the shipwreck to just heavy timbers. though Jim Walker could still confirm that the wreck was of a ship about 90 to 100 feet in length, which is about 30 metres. This would make it a ship the size of Captain Cook's Endeavour, or a ship of 350 to 400 tonnes. Quite small for a Manila galleon, but large for a carrack or a caravel. When Heeb found the wreck in the 1890s, he removed over 100 weight, about 60 kilos, of copper fittings from the landlocked shipwreck. In 1934, there were still various artefacts still to be found by scratching around in the hull. Using an axe, Jim Walker took a roved bolt out of the ship's heavy timbers. Dr. Harold Boy Young scratched around in the remains of the burnt-out hull and found the fine dirk with an antler handle. Mr. Jeffries has recently accepted an offer from a geophysics company called Ultramag to do a free spectral analysis of the swamp called GeoPhys. The scan, which would normally cost about $20,000, should detect the presence of any metals in the swamp's vegetation. It's like Time Team. I love it. If Mr. Jeffries' theories are proven to be correct, it'll be interesting to see the reaction from history and archaeology scholars. Will the books be rewritten, or will the truth be swept under the rug and be conveniently overlooked? The legend of the Stradbroke Island Galleon has polarised the archaeological fraternity for years. And the main bone of contention is not so much the existence of the wreck, but claims that it could predate the East Coast discoveries of Captain James Cook, that he was not, in fact, the first person to chart the Queensland coastline. Redland City Council have warned weekend treasure hunters to stay away from the island. They said, "We don't need amateur archaeologists traipsing through the swamp. Leave it to the professionals." The archaeologists found the artefacts after a tip-off from the son of a RAAF pilot whose father had flown over the area many times during World War II. The pilot, Cyril Broome, claimed to have seen the shipwreck in the swamp between 1938 and 1942 while flying training missions, and calculated the location on a military map using area landmarks. Another map published by Shell in the 1920s includes an entry for wreck of Spanish galleon in about the same location. If only we could get our metal detectors out. I actually have a metal detector. I love it. What do you... Women, Kaz, women love a man with scurvy and bleeding gums. Come on now. Yes, I said poop. Yep, yes, Lurker. I knew you'd find that. Yeah, I know. We could go find the shekels. Well, Kynan, that's interesting because a lot of people on Stradbroke Island even claim to be descendants of survivors from this Portuguese shipwreck. Don't know, we need some DNA tests. Today, in history, May the 24th, in 1830, Mary Had a Little Lamb by Sarah Josepha Hale is first published. On May the 24th, in 1844, Samuel Morse taps out "What hath God wrought" in the world's first telegraph message. And in 1930, 21-year-old Australian cricket master batsman our Don Bradman scores 250 not out in a tour match for Australia versus Surrey. My pick today for 3 historical characters to spend an evening with are, I've kept with the nautical theme. G'day, Simon. Is Canadian legend Stan Rogers, my favourite folk singer. The next one would be Sir John Franklin, once Lieutenant Governor of Van Diemen's Land and expedition commander of the ill-fated search for the Northwest Passage by the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror. We talked about it the other week. And Ferdinand Magellan, the first man to circumnavigate the world, proving, despite some folk, that the world is not, in fact, flat. Let's Yes, indeed, that's very interesting. We learnt all about Dirk Hartog in school, Simon. We went to the Maritime Museum and saw his plate and all his things. Yeah, I would love to see Kaz. I would love to see you and Night Watchers do something together. That would be awesome to bring your communities together. That would be fantastic. And don't everyone forget, Wednesday's going to be so exciting. I have such a special guest coming. Retired Australian Army Major Stuart McCarthy is going to bless us with his presence, and we're going to be talking about the Royal Commission into veteran suicide. It'll be at a special time, 10:30 a.m. So please don't miss that on Wednesday if you can. I'm hoping if we give Stuart McCarthy a really nice experience, he will join us more often. So thank you as always for watching. Please don't forget to give a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Ding my little bell for future notifications of all my uploads, and consider sharing this channel so I can get off my L plates. Then Kaz can put me on my P plates. So it'll be great. So I hope you'll all join me at the same time tomorrow. Love and kisses, everybody. See you later.